Welcome to the Digital Dreaming Off the Ground podcast. I'm your host, Asif Ali. Today's episode will be about the 1990 NFC Championship game, which was effectively the game that I would say effectively ended Joe's career and his run with the Niners, helped launch the Giants to the Super Bowl. And it's also going to be a kind of I guess you could say, a tribute to the unsung hero of that Super Bowl 25, Jeff Hostetler. So essentially, the 90 49ers team, were basically embarking on being the first team to three-peat. As last episode kind of talked about the 88-89 Niners. And essentially, they finished the number one record in the NFC. And, they got to the NFC Championship game, the difference between the game then and now is just, it's apparent. I mean, it's so apparent because, obviously through that game, the only way you could really get Joe out of the game is knocking him out of the game, and essentially that's what they ended up having to do. So I believe I forgot the exact down and the exact play, but, the play essentially was that, Joe was dropped back and then Leonard Marshall, beats, wins his matchup, gets around the line, and attacks Joe from the blind side, and then essentially hits Joe from the back. And Joe basically described it as when he hit the turf, his ribs cracked, he felt his lungs collapse, and he couldn't even breathe. And it was just like they had to take him to the hospital. I mean, you look at the play is so violent to watch. You watch some of the stuff from the 80s and 70s, and the violence was on another level. So I digress. Joe basically, took the hit, and the rest of the way, Jeff Hostetler, basically led the Giants to a win over my Niners. So the Niners effectively weren't able to three-peat, but let's just say they were able to three-peat. What would that do for Joe's legacy? If the Niners three-peated in 1990, I personally believe that Joe would not have been traded to Kansas City 2 years later. I think if Joe hadn't sustained that injury, he would have been the first quarterback to have won 5 championships, 5 Super Bowls, and arguably maybe 6. I don't know. It was very possible and plausible that but that's the nature of the NFL. Some teams are able to make plays when they matter the most, and sometimes plays completely alter and end careers. So. I think ultimately as a Niners fan, I think Joe would have been able to sustain a little bit longer run, obviously, with the Niners, play out the next 5 seasons, with the 49ers instead of having to sit out for 2 and then get traded for KC and play 2 seasons there before hanging it up. And I think ultimately the Niners, may have been the first team not only to win 5, but arguably probably 6, maybe 7, championships. So, people said it's a crime Joe didn't get 5 or 6 rings, but I just want to address that elephant in the room, because a lot of Niners fans like myself, really believe that, even though I wasn't old enough to remember, the actual game of the season. With enough knowledge I have, about Joe and Niners back then, I think it would have definitely been it definitely would have changed the course of history in the NFL. So. Moving onwards back to the Giants, the winners of that game, right? 1990 NFL season. The Giants advanced to the Super Bowl. They played the AFC champion Buffalo Bills, who are also advancing to their first Super Bowl. Head coach Mark Levy versus head coach Big Tuna, Big Bill Parcells, right? And ultimately Jeff Hostetler, coming in and that season, kind of one of the greatest Cinderella stories of all time. Being able to kind of to fill in for an injured Phil Simms, the Super Bowl MVP 5 years prior, and basically be able to carry that team, the distance, to the Super Bowl, and to, and the championship, obviously, wide right, defines a Super Bowl. But, Jeff Hostetler being one of the unsung heroes of the New York Giants, his story is definitely something that, I truly admire because, before the kick was, before wide right happened in that Super Bowl, obviously Jeff went on NFL Films. If you guys haven't watched that episode of the 1990 New York Giants NFL Films, Jeff Hostetler basically stated that, at that point in the game, he felt that, he was at peace with what he was able to do. In the sense, literally, what he said was, he's like, at that point, right before the Bills are lined up for the kick, he basically made peace with the fact that that I went to the sideline, and I just sat on the bench and I basically prayed, and ultimately just knew that I did everything that I had to do, and I made my peace with it. And it ended up being true. He did everything he had to do to win the game. So, obviously fortune favors the bold, but also, I mean, misfortune definitely can happen at any point in time, regardless of how bold or how non-bold you are. I mean, a field goal of such of that nature seems like a safe play, but those critical plays define Super Bowls and define games. So, I mean, it was amazing Super Bowl 25. I mean, it was great, that Jeff was able to prove himself, in the NFL. So, I think that was great. So, anyways, Otis Anderson was MVP of that Super Bowl. I obviously, the Super Bowl itself wasn't really something I personally didn't really care so much for the actual, like, who got the credit in per se, as to kind of who won the MVP. If Jeff won it, then I'd care a lot more. But I just thought, Jeff being one of the unsung heroes, it was really cool that, he was able to take that team and, obviously ride the defense, ride the run game, and lead that team to Super Bowl win. But yeah, man, I mean, I really wish that Leonard Marshall had knocked out Joe. Because maybe, I mean, we'd be standing here with a different discussion today. So about Joe Montana, Tom Brady. Maybe Joe Montana would basically be Michael Jordan to what LeBron James is, in the NFL. So, another thing about that, I think the 49ers, after they traded Joe, the aftermath of the 92 season, we'll probably get into that 94 season a few years later, but, it was just incredible to see how Steve Young was able to take the reins, of Seifert's offense. Even though Walsh had decided to pull the trigger and trade for Steve Young back in '87, it was ultimately Seifert, kind of running the show afterwards. Basically running the show with still with the West Coast offense. Still with the same playbook. But it was remarkable to see how Steve Young was able to kind of come up to speed and really, really carve out a Hall of Fame career. And we'll get into that season, in a few episodes later. But anyways, this is my take on the 1990 NFC Championship game, 1991 NFC Championship game, Super Bowl 25. Jeff Hostetler, the 1990 Giants. Let me know what you guys think. Thank you for tuning in. God bless.